Hello, everybody. Welcome back or welcome to the show. I'm Ashley Adamson, a sports broadcaster for the Pac-12. I live in San Francisco and I am a mom to two young children, a 4 and 6-year-old. And I will say my mom told me when I was growing up that my favorite thing to do was talk, which is why a podcast with no time limit, no producer in my ear telling me that it's time to wrap and that we have to go to break has been like such a wonderful, beautiful medium for me. And I've really enjoyed it. So that said, though, I am very lucky to have a producer on the show. You've heard from her in our first couple episodes, but she's got the spotlight today. And I'm just going to read you a brief bio and then welcome in the one and only Betsy Bloom. But Betsy, an only child with an active imagination, she spent much of her time reading and inventing stories. In middle school, she was an inaugural member of the club Spin-a Storytellers, and she still has a t-shirt to prove it. I look forward to seeing that. Her love of language continued through her time at Colgate University, where she earned a BA. And after graduating, Betsy worked in book publishing, where she engaged with literature in a new way, working directly with authors. And meeting Judy Bloom remains a career highlight. We'll talk to her about that as well. Betsy left publishing to earn a master's in literature from Middlebury's Breadloaf College of English, where she spent 4 summers studying stories, writing essays, and consuming obscene amounts of Vermont cheddar. She also met her husband through the program, which is actually how I know Betsy, which we'll get into that. While earning her degree, Betsy made a career transition into teaching English. 7 years later, it remains her most challenging and rewarding professional experience to date. Betsy and her husband reside in Buffalo, New York, where they are currently renovating a 100-year-old home, binging the Great British Bake Off, and testing the area's best wings. That's like the best introduction of all time and the best bio. So with that, we welcome in Betsy Bloom, executive producer extraordinaire. And I just have to say, Betsy, first and foremost, like, you have a Hollywood name. Like, how have you not had your own show yet? Betsy Bloom, when Mac, your husband, first told us about you, I was like, there's no way that Betsy Bloom, like, that's a character in a movie. There's no way that's a real person.
Yeah, you were like, you're making up a girlfriend again.
Like, here we go again, Mac. Betsy Bloom, sure.
He was looking out at flowers, and he was like, yeah, and bloom.
But I mean, and your first name, and I only know this because of your email address, is Elizabeth.
Yes.
So have you always been Betsy?
I've always been Betsy. It was my mom really liked the name Elizabeth, and my dad made the he was like, only if we can call her Betsy. And so that was the agreement that they came to. But yeah, I haven't changed my name even though I got married because it's just too good. I was
it's
like,
too good. I am so glad that you didn't, and hold strong, because Betsy Stevens, like, it just doesn't have the same ring to it. So thank you for staying strong. As we talked about with Chantal in our last episode, like, changing your name is a thing.
It is, yeah, I know, and when we went to get our marriage license, they were like, "Make a decision right now," and I was like, "I didn't know that I would have to."
Wasn't expecting
I
to,
wasn't
yeah.
prepared for this.
You made the
But
right
yeah.
decision. Which I guess we should start with how you and I met, which is through, so your husband was the best man at my wedding, Mac, and he's one of those, he's my husband's best friend, and he is one of those people that, like, the first time I met him, I'm like, who are you?
Likewise.
Like, what is going on? And I was laughing so hard because you said this the other day, and I think it's the perfect way to sum him up. When you were like, yeah, I always thought I was going to, like, date all these different types of guys. And what did you say? It was like, you thought you were going to
Yeah,
date
I
a
was like, I wanna
cowboy.
date, like, an athlete and a cowboy and a writer and a nerd.
And you didn't have to date multiple people. You got all of those things in one.
I did.
He's like an
total
onion.
package.
Max
Yeah.
Stevens is like an onion, and we love him dearly. So I'm thankful to him for bringing you into my life.
Me too.
And what's funny is that, we've met and hung out maybe in real life, like 2 or 3 times.
Yeah.
One of which was at your wedding, which, you had some other stuff going on than, like, hanging
That's a
out with
little
me.
bit.
But
I mean, that was the most important part.
but I always felt like, and, maybe a little bit of a creeper, and you were probably like, "Oh my God, who is this girl?" But I told my husband, Chris, I'm like, ever since, like, being at your wedding, and, you get a real, obviously, intimate sense of people when you get to hear their closest friends and family talk about them and see how you were that day, and your vows, which I've talked about, were like the most amazing thing in the world. But when I was starting to figure out, like, I know that I want to start this storytelling company and I don't exactly know what it is or what it looks like, but there's one person who just like keeps coming up in my mind of, I need to call her and see if she'd be willing to do something with me. And I don't even know what it is or what the ask is, but I just want her to be involved on some level. Like, it was you. And Chris said to me, he's like, just call her. Like, and I remember texting Mac, like, would Betsy be weird if I reached out? So thank you for not being weirded out by me. I really appreciate it, because it wasn't like we knew each other all that well. And we have gotten to know each other a lot better over the last couple of months. So I appreciate you saying yes, even though you had no reason to.
Well, I don't agree that I had no reason to, and thank you for asking. I mean, I felt the exact opposite way. It was kind of like I felt like our husbands were like setting us up on a play date, like, and I was like, "Oh my god, I'm so like she wants to hang out with me." And I just want to say officially thank you for asking. Thank you for asking me to be on, and thank you for asking me to take on this role as executive producer, because it's, you feel like you're on one career trajectory, and it's really amazing to have the opportunity to explore the skills that I've developed in a different way. And every element of this has just been enlightening and enriching and energizing. So
Oh,
thank you for asking.
well, that fills my cup deeply. And I do think, and let's talk about what, your kind of career and your path, because it is interesting. Like, timing is everything, right? And we've
Yeah.
talked about it, where you work as a teacher in Buffalo, New York right now. And last year you were full time. You teach high school sophomore English.
So I last year I was teaching freshmen, juniors, and seniors.
Wow.
So everyone but the sophomores I had actually exposure to.
And it was a lot, I imagine.
Yeah.
Like, I think teaching a full schedule can be very demanding and very exhausting for a lot of different reasons, but you made the change this year. You decided that you were gonna reduce some of that schedule. Do I have that right?
Yeah, I made the decision. At first, I was like, and we've talked about this a little bit, but after the pandemic, we were all so burnt out, and everyone was
Mhm.
burnt out for different reasons. If you were a mom, if you were a health professional, if you were just a human being living in the world at that time, but I felt so burnt out that I was like, I don't think I can do this anymore. And I went and spoke to my principal, and she was like, "What if you went down to part time?" Which it was such a generous and thoughtful offer of her, because there are so many people that would just be like, okay, we'll find someone else.
Yeah.
And I spent a lot of time thinking about it and decided to. And then I was like, okay, I'm going to teach part time, and I have no idea what else I'm going to do. And that is really out of character for me to feel comfortable stepping into the unknown. And then you called, and I was like, hello.
I was just I was just waiting. I'm like the girl in the window, just like, "Okay, when is she gonna all right, good, things are falling into place. Perfect. Now."
Okay, well, I was like writing in my diary, like, when
God,
will
just
my
give me a
opportunity
sign.
come? Yeah, exactly. It was like, if you want me to do something else, give me a sign, and then my phone rang. But yeah, so it felt very serendipitous.
Yeah.
And there was a little bit of imposter syndrome when you first brought it up to me, but I feel so much more comfortable now as we've been going into it. And I'm grateful for living a little bit in that unknown, because it opened up a lot of opportunities.
Amen. And I feel so much that, when Lisa and I started this podcast last season, it was really scary, right? Because you're starting something that it's totally out of your comfort zone. And even if you sort of think you have the skills, like, you just don't know all the ins and outs, and you've got all this advice. And what you realize is that, like, just let that go and just go start doing it. And so much of, especially as I've gotten older, I don't know, I'm older than you. So maybe I'm assuming that you've like started to experience this, but all of a sudden I'm in the like age bracket where I look around, and instead of being the one, like trying to, ooh, who can you introduce me to them? Like, our friends are the ones that are doing all the cool shit. Like, they're the ones that
Yeah.
have the jobs and that are running the show, and I'm like, okay, this is kind of amazing. Like, we've been in the workforce long enough, and you realize that I used to have this view of people who, were executives and who were high up in senior level management, of being like, man, they must be like,
Right.
they must have it all figured
They
out.
have something else. They have a special sauce that I
There
will
is
never.
something about that. And then you like become those people and you're like, oh no, you're just a human trying to figure it out like the rest of us. Like, you're smart, sure, and like you work hard, but like so do a lot of other people, and we're all just a bunch of humans trying to figure it out. So yeah, I think I'm really grateful for what, like, the space that this provides, because if you, again, if you've listened to the first couple episodes, like, that this season of the show looks different than season one. And yes, we're still like celebrating and focusing on motherhood as sort of the core, but like the lens is wider now. And I think a lot of that is because of everything that we learned last year.
Right.
And it was around like how much moms sharing their stories, like how much it mattered. And it's interesting when you were talking at the beginning about like how grateful you were, and you said thank you for asking. Chris Darnold, Sam Darnold's mom, she was our very first interviewee. And she said at the end of episode one something that has like stuck with me to this day. And this was whatever, a year and a half ago, almost 2 years ago. She said, we were thanking her for coming on. She just said, like, she like grabbed my hand. She was like, thank you. Like, thank you for asking, because nobody ever asks. And I was kind of like, whoa, I think that was like deeper than just a thank you for asking to come on, thing. And what
Right.
I realized when I asked her about it, and she was like, just no one ever like asks about my story. It's always about Sam, and which is great and it should be. But it was really wonderful to be able to sit down and like have these conversations and go back into the memory bank and think about all that stuff. So I only have that very long-winded way of saying you and I got to do this what on Monday, like 2 days ago.
Yeah.
We got
Yeah.
to sit down and I got to interview you in a really, to me, meaningful way that was kind of like the prototype as we're developing this storytelling company and what it's going to look like. And I guess I'm just curious for you. I don't, maybe you have had someone sit down and ask you those questions before, but as you like look back on what that was, I mean, you have to say it was enjoyable because you can't tell me that it wasn't now. I'm the one asking the question, but like, was it
It's really
interesting to you to
awkward.
be able to go back and look and think about some of that stuff?
Yeah, I think that, and we talked about this a lot when you have been talking about this idea of like, we should just be getting people's stories, gathering people's stories, because both in the telling of your story, you understand yourself better. And then in the hearing of other people's stories, you understand other people better. Um, and so I think it's sort of a similar idea of like, who am I to deserve to tell my story? And then if you flip that and like what Chantal was saying, like, what if it was the opposite? Like, why shouldn't my story be told? And so I had to sort of like pump myself up, like, no, you have interesting things to say. Similarly to like the CEO isn't that much smarter than you, they just do it.
Right.
And so it was really rewarding to feel worthy of telling that story. And I think that a lot of what you're doing is like demystifying that process and reminding people that everyone's story is important and everyone should tell it, both so that other people can hear it, but so that they themselves can hear it. And so, it just felt really gratifying.
You said that better than I've been able to say. I'm going to have you be the one that gives all of our elevator pitches, because that's a much more succinct version than anything that I've been saying. But it
Maybe
is,
I'm just
and I
like,
think,
have
yeah,
just like diluted everything you said. Like, I'm like,
no,
this was my idea.
you simplified it, which is at the core of what what I need to work on. But I do think that I mean, you said it perfectly. And one of the things that I have discovered through having the career that I've been lucky enough to have in broadcasting, and I've interviewed all sorts of different people. Um, but this notion that like, why is it that there's a small subset of people who get to decide whose stories are told, right? Like, why is it that the Hollywood executives, the, journalists, the publishers, the writers, they all, yes, are great at finding stories and we're all better off for that. But every single person on the planet has like unique sacred stories that are their own and only that they can tell. And until you get asked about it, you like don't think that it matters, and you don't put your story into a larger context, and you don't take that time to reflect. So
Right.
I interviewed a firefighter yesterday in San Francisco, and he was like, he was a mutual friend. He's a brother-in-law of a good friend of mine, and I could tell he was kind of like, what did I agree to do? Like, what are we doing here? And at first, he told me afterwards, he goes, I was really nervous for this, and he goes, and that was it was like cathartic to really think about and talk about some of this stuff. And he goes, and no one's really ever like asked me about it. And I said, yeah, we save all of these stories for when people aren't here anymore. And
Right.
we need to not do that. We need to not do that. So yeah, I appreciate that. And I think one of the things that, and we talked about this when I was kind of getting your story, but your role now as a teacher and your love of story from like
Hmm.
when you were a little girl. So just, I mean, to kind of like set the scene of how you got into the track and fell in love with language and storytelling, like when did it first become a thing for you?
Yeah. I mean, as far back as I can remember, I've loved stories. And I don't know if we got into this, but like I had such a vivid imagination that I would have imaginary conversations with characters from the books that I was reading, but like I couldn't like imagine that I was not in my bed. So it would happen like as I was falling asleep. And so in every situation I was like very sick because I was in bed. But I would be having conversations and I would be like, I so wish I could go to Narnia, but I'm not feeling well. Like it was like this like weird liminal space.
I am
Um
loving this.
so that was one of my first memories is just like imagining that I was part of these worlds.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, yeah, I mean, as I said in my vows, like it made me feel like that those worlds were possible, those feelings were possible, those emotions were possible, those connections. And I think it made me idealistic, which has in some cases led to disappointments, but in other cases led to me like holding out hope for those things, those possibilities. Um, and that's what I really want to bring to my students is like you can live the life that you have dreamt about or read about. And you know, even as we were just thinking about or talking about this, I was thinking about like when you're in school, you spend so much time absorbing stories, telling stories, being told that your story matters. And then you become an adult and like no one asks you again. And it's like, why do we stop? You know, I want to know so much about my students. I want them to write and share and journal. And then it's like, okay, but once you graduate from college, like no one will care about that anymore.
That resonates so much with me, Betsy. I was listening to Andrew Luck was giving a keynote speech at this event that I was at over the summer, and he was saying that the thing that sports teaches you the most is like it sets up a space for you to fail, where like failure is
Mhm.
part of it,
Right.
and that sets you up for life, which is great. He said the problem is life doesn't also come with the coaches who are there to help you through that failure. And it's the same thing in with teachers and like school. It's like we do all these things and then say, "Oh, this is going to prepare you for the real world." But then you get out there and all of a sudden you're like, "Wait, but all the stuff that you just said now isn't reality because there's nobody else there." Like I that really resonates. And I think that probably one of the hard parts is, well, what was it like for you when you transitioned from being in school and you obviously have gone to more school than most people and the time
Yeah.
that you had at Breadloaf, like being out in the real world compared to like being in the cocoon of education, was it a hard transition?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think I was thinking about when I was listening to your conversation with Chantal about like why are we the way we are? And I think that for me, like you don't get a grade when you're doing a job.
Mhm.
So, I mean, you get a performance review, right? But it's not like you're just like getting that constant positive reinforcement.
Yep.
And so yeah, I think that I was always like, am I doing a good job? I don't know if I'm how am I to know? Like, and it's like you
How
don't
am I
get
to
a
know?
sticker every day for like being on time. Like it's just expected.
I'm gonna start grading you at the end of every like, just at the end of every episode, I'm gonna give you a grade. Is that would that
Well,
feel validating or would that be helpful?
when I was first working at Simon and Schuster, they had this blog called Off the Shelf where they had people who worked in the publishing industry read a book that they hadn't read before and talk about it. And so I read a separate piece because I had never read it in school. And people kept being like, how have you never read it in school? And I was like, okay, fine, I'll read it. And so when I was reading it, I kept like thinking about how I would write an essay about it. And then I determined that I, of course, didn't have to do that. And that was what my blog post ended up being about. Like,
Ah.
I was like, it's so enjoyable to read something and not get graded on it. And then the first comment was from this man that just said B minus. I was like, okay.
That's, um, that's amazing. Okay, this is a little
Authenticity.
bit off track, but I just feel like it was such a good story that came out when we were talking the other day that I just want it to be out in the public. Can you please share the story of your Harry Potter competition?
Yes. So I, when my mid 20s, which is like already like, you're like, can you talk about Harry Potter? I'm like, yes, as an adult. I was joined this like quiz app that had all sorts of categories, and one of them was Harry Potter. And I challenged the number one Harry Potter player in the world to quiz and beat him.
Like, did you challenge him because you just felt such confidence in how much you knew about Harry Potter, or were you just like, this will be hilarious if I can beat
I think I
him?
was like, "This will be hilarious."
Yeah.
I was like, "There's a chance, but I don't think it's gonna happen. I think he's
Yeah.
the best in the world." And so I beat him, and my roommates then threw me a party when I got home,
As they should have.
as they should.
Uh-huh. And was it like
Um,
Harry Potter themed, I hope?
yeah, it
And
was Harry Potter themed.
yeah.
There was a poster board. I'll send you a photo of it.
Okay,
It
I'd
was
like that.
pretty,
I'd like
yeah. It was gratifying, but I also was like, as you said, like, "I deserve this. This is a huge accomplishment." Like,
duh.
um,
There should be more
but
people here,
yeah,
really, but
one of my roommates took my phone and taunted Carson, who was the number 1 Harry
Mhm.
Potter player in the world, and said, like, "Who's the real Harry Potter fan?" And he responded immediately, "Anyone who's read the series, you dumb bitch."
I mean,
Which,
Carson,
like,
like, kind of a good burn, Carson, like
I mean, I didn't respond. I was like, "Okay,
oh,
yeah."
yeah, did you just, like it? Like,
I don't even this was, like, pre, like, you could like
pre-liking
something.
to it, yeah.
But yeah, I remember feeling, like,
Oh
really
god.
disappointed that, like, someone who loved Harry Potter so much was also, like, but it
A
didn't, I mean,
a
I guess I
dick.
was, like, exposed to the misogyny of the online gaming
Yeah,
community.
I think maybe you weren't ready for that. That was
Yeah, I
that
wasn't.
before
I was
Mac?
playing in
Like,
the
that
big
was
leagues,
before
and I
Mac.
wasn't.
Yeah, you didn't you hadn't your husband hadn't introduced you to that world yet.
Right, exactly. Now I would go in
Now you're
fully prepared.
prepared. Oh my
Yeah.
god, I just love that I love that story, yeah.
Yeah, so
People
for a
online
brief
are real
brief
like,
moment.
there's a lot of testosterone and a lot of, yeah, confidence, and people can say whatever they want. The B minus though, like, that's really, like, very funny, but,
Very funny,
like, it
and
is
so
very funny.
specific.
Yeah,
Like,
very
it
specific.
actually hurt my
Like a
feelings more than if it had been a C.
I was just gonna say a B minus is worse than a C, I think, in many ways.
100%.
Like, a B minus is the most unsatisfying grade out there. Are you a tough grader?
You know what? I give a lot of comments, um, but I think that I'm a more generous grader. I
Mm,
think English teachers can be it's hard 'cause our line is so subjective,
yeah.
and so I'll go through the rubric and I'll be like, should probably be an 85, and then I'll give them, like, an 87 so that, like, if there's a complaint, I'm like, "It really should be an 85." You know, like, I have that, like, wiggle room where I'm like,
Yeah.
"Okay, you wanna talk about it?"
And
But
every
yeah, I
every
I
comment,
can't
it's
help
going down a grade. It's going down a point.
Don't come crying to me. Um, yeah, but I can't help myself with feedback, like, I'm
Yeah.
like they get the thing back and it's full of I try not to use red ink because I know it's triggering, but it's full of, like, purple ink, which is they know.
Is that a thing now? Red ink is we're not supposed to use
Not
red ink?
actually, but, like, I think they
Okay.
just
They
associate it.
just associate that with, like, bad. Yeah, okay.
Right, like,
Do
if
you
it's full
find
of
that
red.
that, like, drive to give feedback carries over into like, your marriage?
Yeah,
Do you give Mac a lot of good feedback?
I do.
Yeah, and he needs it, so I think that's great.
Yeah, I mean, he actually, like, is really he'll be like, "Thank you for that feedback. I appreciate it." I'm like,
Is
"Do you
he
have
like
any feedback for me?" And he's like, "No, because I'm not grading you."
you're like, "Well, that makes one of us." Okay.
Right? I'm like, "Be
Thank you
funny."
for that feedback. Oh god, yeah. Well, that's good because men typically don't love feedback, I think.
Yeah,
I have found that.
I have found that as
So
well.
and I also found so I've taught a few classes, storytelling classes actually. A
Cool.
few years ago at USF in their sports management program, I taught a storytelling class. It was right before I had Collins. I think I taught for about 3 years, and I really struggled with grading. Like, I could not give a
Right?
bad grade. Even for the kid like, there was one kid who just I mean, he showed up, but, like, just physically, and that was it. Like, it was almost I mean, the stuff that he turned in, I'm like, "Dude, you could have written anything, and
Right.
I would have given you a good grade." And I just felt like I'm like, "This I feel like you're taunting me to see if I'll give you a bad grade," and I really struggled with it. So I don't think I'm cut out fully to be a teacher because I'm just too much I don't know, maybe I'm too much of a pushover or like but or I hated getting bad grades so badly,
Right.
like, I was so driven by getting good grades that I'm like, "Well, I know what getting a C would have done to me.
Right.
Not gonna do
Right,
that
I
to
think that
somebody else."
yeah, ultimately is part of it. I was gonna say because, like, they don't necessarily care as much. Like, I'm like, well, what will this do to their self-worth? And they're like, I don't care.
I'm good. I'm good.
Like, clearly, because I didn't try. And I'm like, they'll think I think they're not smart. No.
Oh, yeah. It's that whole story we're telling ourselves.
But what was your
Um,
favorite part of teaching? You didn't like
oh,
the grading, but what did you like?
you know what's interesting is that I always thought I was gonna be a teacher. So I was an English
Wow,
major in college, and I was like, "Wow, I know English. I'll study that. Great. I can do
same.
that." And I really always thought that I was gonna be a teacher. That was sort of my track, and then ended up, I think my dad had planted the seed of sports broadcasting when I was younger, and I just always kind of was like, what do I have to say? Like, why would anyone listen to me talk about sports? And here we are. So thank you, Dad. Shout
Right.
out to you. But I really loved, I mean, there were so many things that I could say were hard about it. And then, but like the one thing that kept you coming back and that really is that you'd have those one or two students that you just like actually could tell that you said something that meant something to them. Or I had a student
Mhm.
reach out to me recently and said, "Yeah, you said something in one of your classes that I didn't even remember saying that." I'm like, "Are you sure I said that?" And it totally changed my view on X, Y, or Z. And so I think the ability to have that space, and it's pressure filled. Like I felt way more nervous walking into a classroom of 15 to 20 students than I ever really have felt, maybe other than very early on in my career, have felt being on camera, because it's
Wow.
that automatic feedback where
Yes.
it's vulnerable, like getting up in front of a room of people and being like, it is my job to teach you something and to help you grow and help you learn and help you think. And and not having been formally trained and like, I have a lot of ideas about all this stuff. And I think I've read enough, but I didn't really know how to teach. So those were 4-hour classes that I was
Oh my
teaching.
gosh.
And it was a lot. We did a lot of like small group time, a lot of
I
snack
love small
breaks. Yeah, small groups were amazing. They enjoyed them too. But yeah,
Yeah.
I think and I'd ask you the same thing. Like, what is it that that keeps coming back? Because there's a million reasons why. And I say this all the time, and I'm not just saying this because it's you. I've said this on the air. I say it all the time. I think teachers are the most undervalued and underappreciated profession that there is. Like, and maybe nurses, but I'm like, if
Yeah.
there is one profession that should be the highest paid, the most like sought after, put on a pedestal of like, these people are shaping like how our world is going to turn out, because they're helping shape the people who are going to be in the world. Like, that to me has always been, I think it's one of the travesties of our culture, is that we don't celebrate and honor teachers in the way that we should. Like, we think we do, but we do not.
I agree. Yeah, like I saw something that was like any job that has a like appreciation day or appreciation week, you just know that you're not being paid enough.
So true.
Like secretary or executive assistant
Yeah. Yep.
appreciation day, you're like, cool, so you're
Yeah.
underpaid.
Uh-huh.
Great.
It's so true.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, every day should be Teacher Appreciation Day, or they should
Yeah.
just freaking pay teachers more. That also
Right.
would help. But
Yeah.
what do you love about it?
Yeah. I mean, I think the highest highs, like just that feeling of it clicking for a student.
Mhm.
And like sometimes you just like throw absolutely everything you have at the class and see what sticks. And when it finally does stick, it's like this just incredible feeling. And
Yeah.
I mean, they're so true. Like it's to your point of like that automatic feedback. Like I think all stand-up comics should test their routines in front of teenagers because they won't laugh if they don't think it's funny. Like there's no sympathy laughter that happens. Like they're like,
You know this, from experience.
oh, one time I had like an out of body experience when I was singing along to Schoolhouse Rock because I thought that they were also going to sing and they didn't. And I just like kept doing, I was like looking at myself from above, being like, this is happening in
Just
real time.
stop.
And like not one kid saved me. They weren't like, yeah, conjunction, junction. They were like, this is really embarrassing for you. But I appreciate that, like, because then you know that when they say something good, it's coming from an
It's real.
honest place. Right. There's none of that, like, that coworker is like always complimenting my sweater, but I think maybe they hate it. Like, it's just real.
It's
So,
real. Oh, you know
yeah,
what? You're right. I love that about teenagers, is that what you
yeah,
see is what you get. How did
yeah.
that scene end, by the way, that you singing?
I think I let them go early. It was like a terrible like, they were like, "Cool, if we make her feel bad, she'll let us go to lunch."
But you guys have a small group to get to. It's
Yeah.
done
I
here.
know.
My work here is done for the day.
It's like, review the parts of speech for
Uh,
homework.
isn't it though? But you are a very witty and funny person, and I imagine, and I felt this when I taught, like, I'd say something that I thought was gonna be funny, and there was nothing. And then I'd
Great.
say something another time, and they would get a reaction. I'd be like, you guys do not have a good sense of humor.
Yes. Also that.
You guys are not nearly as funny as I am, clearly.
Right, right. Yeah, you have to think that,
You
otherwise it's
you
just
have
soul crushing. But
that's a
in your case,
story
it
that's
was true.
important to tell yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, well, and I do wanna talk about stories, and this is something that we talk about with Chantal, like, again, as kind of the crux of what we're doing here is revealing and helping people understand that their stories matter and the power of stories. And even when you and I were first talking, when I called you on the phone for the first time and was kind of talking through this idea, I felt like you just had such a beautiful way of describing why stories are important and why they are powerful. And you alluded to it a little bit and how you kind of fell in love with them. But if I were to ask you that simple question, like, why are stories important? What would you say?
Yeah, I mean, I think they breed empathy is what I would say. Like, we it's really empowering to know that your story matters, and it's also really empowering to know that your story isn't the only one that matters.
Mhm.
Um, because then what's left the only thing that's left there is kindness and compassion. So the more that I've read, the more I feel the wiser I feel. I don't think that I am wise, but I think that there is wisdom. I'm getting wiser because of the experiences that I've had and the things that I've read. And I can't meet everyone and I can't travel everywhere, but I can absorb the stories of people that I'll never meet. So
I love that. Do you think that your students, like, at what age do people start to realize, or do you think that innately we knew as kids and younger that we were better at understanding how important stories were and we lose it as we get to adults?
I think that we lose it as we get to adults to some extent. I mean, it's like there's this idea of like the soft subjects, and those subjects are often the humanities, right? Like
Mhm.
that this is like a more touchy-feely subject, but no one's like, "I'm not gonna read a book to my kid because that's soft," right? Like, it's but like, if they're interested in stories, they're not gonna make any money when they're older, so it's just like, why do we suddenly stop thinking they're important? I don't know. I think that we have some work to do on that.
I cannot wait to tell Chris tonight when he goes to read Collins and Cora bedtime story that he's soft. I'm like,
Yeah.
"Oh, reading another story, you soft, so
It's
soft."
not gonna make them money. What are you teaching them? You should be going over spreadsheets.
Right. Does it matter that, like, oh my god, I'm thinking of, like, the 800 bad books that I read, like, that not quite narwhal doesn't know if he's a narwhal or, like, a sea unicorn, like, but it does matter,
It
right? It
does,
does. It
exactly.
does matter. Oh,
Yeah.
man. Okay, so I think there's so many more things that I'm excited to be able to dive into with you throughout the course of the season and many conversations to come, but I think I'll leave it. We'll do a moment of gratitude. But before we get to that, and I think it was a question that I asked you the other day when we were doing a recording that I think most parents will wanna hear. What do you wish as a teacher that every parent could understand innately? Like, if you could just take an idea and put it in their brain and have them process it and understand it, what would it be?
Yeah, I think it would be to see their kid more holistically from a more 360-degree view. That's always really hard. As a teacher, as a parent, you're only seeing what's in front of you. I'm only seeing that student for the periods that I teach them. You're only seeing them, on the weekends, in the morning, in the afternoon, and in some cases, like for a few hours because you have really busy schedules. And so just understanding that, like, if your kid is failing in one area, they might be succeeding in another. And the area where they're succeeding might be a little bit less obvious to you. Like it might be that they were a really good friend that day and maybe they didn't do well in their math test, or they scored a hockey goal that they were really proud of, but they, forgot to bring in their lunch, and so they're hungry. Whatever it is that you can't see, kids are dealing with a lot, and we should be celebrating the whole student as opposed to just like their certain successes.
I love that. That is, and that is true for all of us, right? Like I think sometimes you forget to think about all the stuff that people are dealing with,
Right.
in their lives, and you see through them, like whatever version of the story you're telling yourself. Okay.
Exactly.
Moment of gratitude. Who are you giving a shout out to tonight?
Gosh, that's this is going to sound really cliche and cheesy, but I would like to say thank you to you. And I've already said it,
Yeah.
but just for this opportunity, because I've now had the chance to listen to a really amazing episode with Chantal that felt like free therapy, and um, just for making me feel like I was capable, and for listening to my story. I really appreciate it.
Oh, well, thank you for that. I obviously am so grateful for you for all of the reasons that I've talked about, and just you not being totally weirded out and making me feel like there's something to this whole idea. It means a lot. And just to have someone that you feel like you're in it with is
Mhm.
really powerful. So thank you for that. And I'm just going to do a collective shout out to both of our husbands. So I know
Yeah.
we
Oh,
like
thanks for
I feel like
covering
that's like
my base
the
there.
easiest ones to forget, and we'll probably would go through a whole season without ever mentioning them as we get to like obscure people from like our first grade classes that had an impact on us. But
I'm like, I've run out of people to thank.
yeah, I can't think of anybody else. I know there's somebody, but no, but Chris, my husband, is just like a godsend to my life. And I can't imagine, I mean, I wouldn't have my life if it wasn't for him and what he's brought to it. He was like the answer to everyone that I hoped that I would ever meet. And
Mhm.
he is the best dad, and he's an unbelievable husband, and he is like the rock of our family. And I just appreciate him so much. And um, when I first started dating him, it was kind of like I was breaking up him and Mac because they were living together at the time. My husband and your husband were living together when we first started dating, and he was in LA. And I remember feeling very much like I'm taking Chris away from somebody who I don't know that he'll ever feel about me the way that he feels about this other person. So and Mac, I didn't know if Mac was ever like, Mac had this like view that there was somebody out there, and we both wanted him to find it so badly, and then he freaking found it, and that's you, and now we're doing this together, and it's amazing how the world comes full circle. But I will say, if our husbands ever leave us for each other, like I think you and I could have a nice life together.
Yeah,
So
it'll be like Grace and Frankie.
yeah,
It'll be great.
exactly. Actually, that sounds kind of great. That sounds kind of fun. I'm up for Buffalo. I've lived in upstate New York before. I'm like totally, I'm down. I think I can have the
Yeah,
house out
maybe
here.
we'll like summer in Buffalo, and then we can move over
We'll
to
fit another place somewhere, maybe in Florida
California.
or something.
Yeah, exactly. Well, yeah,
All right. I love you, Betsy. You're the
I
best.
love you too. Thank you.
We will more to come. And thanks as always, everybody, for listening. We're so excited to have you on this journey with us. Make sure you review and rate the podcast. It really does help the algorithm. And we'll be back with a lot more stories next week. See you then.